Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to what is the second webinar of Profit and Progress, the Women in Accounting series. My name is David Bobat. I'm co-founder of If Talent, and I'm joined today by my fellow hosts, Rachel Franklin, who's also co-founder of If Talent. We also have Lucy Parr, who's the Managing Director of First Intuition, Yorkshire and Humber, and Sam Newton, who's a co-founder of Gravitate Accounting. I guess just wanted to set the scene initially in terms of how this webinar series and collaboration has come about, and taking you back probably around this time last year where we met with Lucy Parr over a coffee, and amongst many things we discussed, the topic came up about how in her experience at First Intuition, Lucy found over the last couple of years that female number of women entering the profession and as apprentices was going down massively. And then once we dug a bit deeper and Lucy had conversations with other accounting firms and other organisations that were taking on apprentices, that those numbers were declining across the board. So it made us look a little bit deeper to understand that actually, there has been challenges for women that finance have faced for a long time, but ultimately we believe that finance should be a place where women, it's not about just entering the profession, but how can they stay, thrive and lead and within there. So we've seen far too many stories, even as recruiters, myself and Rachel, and of careers stalling midway. And there's lots of conversation that needs to be had about ultimately what can help women not just enter the profession, but just sort of engage and then move up within the ranks as well. So this sort of three-part series we launched just after some holidays. So we did webinar 1 a few weeks ago, which is focused on entry and attraction. And then today we're looking into the sort of mid-career years, really. So how could you, as you're going through your sort of earlier mid-career, that really critical stretch where women either rise, or sometimes we do hear sadly that they do plateau, or some do exit the profession as well. So it's part of a three-part series, but obviously this one will sort of dive sort of straight in. We've got an amazing panel lined up for you today, and hopefully they're here and we're here just to spark an honest, practical dialogue and conversation and to give you some great insight. So again, thank you for everyone that's joining and sort of taking part, and of course to the guests as well.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. So I'm Rachel Franklin, co-founder of If Talent. I think just to sort of reiterate what Jav was saying, our first session was all around, and Lucy shared some really interesting data around entry into finance, which essentially was, lots of applicants into the apprentice role across businesses were sometimes as strong as 80-20 male dominant. And that actually the numbers of females entering the profession has also dropped from sort of 46% to 42%. But actually increasingly more females lead the profession as they sort of become into more senior level roles. So that was really focused around kind of, tackling that and how we I guess make finance a little bit more sort of exciting and interesting for that next generation. So it can be a bit black and white and obviously ones and twos, and how we make that a bit more sort of sexy and attractive for that next generation coming through. And there was some really interesting insight actually around social media, which links into that, and we've got a part on that today. So today's key topics are going to be more focused on sort of navigating career journeys and kind of pivotal moments, overcoming challenges, of which we all know there are many, and particularly as you're coming up to more senior level roles, sort of gaining skills and how you stay competitive in a very, very fast changing finance landscape, and sort of future proofing your career. I think the importance of digital presence, which again is becoming increasingly popular around sort of promoting your own personal branding and social media. And then also coaching or mentoring, which again I know as a recruiter, as the sort of network that we speak to is a really undervalued and actually can make a huge impact on your career. So they're the kind of key areas that we're going to look at today. And a massive welcome. Thank you everybody for the panel, for joining us. I'll just give a very quick sort of overview, but I'll let you all sort of introduce yourself. So we've got Kira Allen from CFO of ARC Inspiration. So Kira supported a number of kind of PE and family-owned businesses, and actually became an FD very young in her career, in her 20s, I think it was, Kira. So she'll have lots of insight to sort of share from her experiences. And I know Kira for a few years. She's an absolute infectious sort of ball of energy. So she definitely brings finance to life. We've got Alex Vogel, who leads EY's private business practice, and I know Alex again is a massive advocate of diversity and also does a huge amount of kind of community impact work. So that links into a lot of the sort of social branding piece as well. And I think is an incredibly well networked person. Alex, I don't think there's anyone who doesn't know you in the Yorkshire community. And then finally we've got Jenny, and Jenny is a partner in the transactional services team at Quartus Advisory. And actually, interestingly, a really underrepresented area in that space for females to reach that partner level. So again, Jenny's kind of got some great insight around that, and also heads up compliance, ESG, and people. So yeah, I'm sure there'll be some very different perspectives for them all to share today. So I'll hand over to the panel, and Kira, if you just want to kick off just with a little bit of background about yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I am currently CFO of Arc Inspirations, which is a PE-backed nationwide hospitality business. But I started my career at KPMG a long time ago. Went into industry pretty much as soon as I qualified as an auditor. And I think I'm probably very sector agnostic. So you name it, I've done it. I've been in oil, coal, steel, gas, retail, business process and outsourcing, and in a few months I'm actually about to embark on a new journey where I'm going to be a global CFO for a brand activation agency. So a very varied career in different industry sectors and cultures. I've been in PE just under 10 years now, and as I say, the new role I'm going into is actually going back into privately owned, so that'll be another fresh challenge.
Thanks, Kira.
Hi everyone, great to be here. So I'm Alex Vogel, partner at EY. As Rachel said, I lead our private business across the north of England. So I spend my day out with businesses every single day, just helping them with whatever that business need might be. So from traditional services through to aspects like technology transformation, AI and other areas. I've been at EY 5 years now, but I actually started my career at Barclays Corporate on the graduate programme and pretty much did every role there is to do in corporate banking before 5 years being headhunted to come across to EY to set up what we called at the time the Origination Hub. I absolutely love working with different businesses, and that's kind of where I really sort of thrive. And yeah, really looking forward to getting to the discussion with Rachel and the team today.
Thanks, Alex.
Hi everyone, I'm Jenny Kirkham. I'm a transaction services partner at Quartus Advisory Group, but I also started my career in audit at KPMG. I spent 5 years there, however, and then I went on a client secondment to part of the INEOS group and ended up helping them dispose of the business to a Mexican listed PLC, doing special purpose carve-out accounts, IFRS conversion, and changing reporting timescales from 2 to 3 weeks to flash results in 3 days. I love the experience, and I found my niche in terms of transaction and project work. So when I returned to practice, I joined the transaction services team. I had my first child whilst I was a director at KPMG, but since then joined Quartus Advisory Group when it set up nearly 5 years ago. I've just returned from my second maternity leave early this year, and my focus is very much on private equity and private equity backed businesses in terms of the transaction work that I do. But as mentioned before, small growing business, I have many hats, compliance, ESG and people being mine, and happy to say that we have just obtained our B Corp certification.
Thanks, Jenny. I think Jav and I can both resonate with that many hats feeling. So no, thanks everybody for the introductions. So I guess just a few sort of key areas, and Kira, you mentioned about it. You've been in so many different sectors, in turnaround, in growth, in private equity, in privately owned. loads of different experiences. Was there any kind of key pivotal moments for you that kind of really impacted on your progression, on succession, that you can sort of share with everybody?
Yeah, I think there's three sort of big pivotal moments in my career that either shaped the direction I went in or the decisions I made. The first of those was when I was in my early 20s and I took my first management role, and I got it because no one wanted it. The person that wanted it resigned, and I was quite new to the business. So I was fired into the deep end, and that really was, I was out of my depth. So that really, I think, accelerated my career very early on. And to be in my 20s managing 9 people and a multi-million-pound rollout project. So that sort of helped me become that leader and manager. The second was probably that first FD role. Again, I was in my 20s, got a role in an industry I'd not worked in, and was a big challenge, and had to take that, and was there for just over 4 years. And probably the third pivotal moment was the decision when I decided to go and work in private equity businesses 10 years ago and enter that sort of part of my career journey, which, like you guys said, you end up wearing many, many different hats. So you learn a completely different skill set, and you're more than just a CFO in those businesses. So they were probably my three pivotal moments that took me in where I am today.
And I guess all of that is massively taking yourself out your comfort zone, isn't it? Taking a managerial role in your late 20s, taking your first FD role, moving into PE. It sort of shows the impact when actually you back yourself and you take a bit of a risk and you go out your comfort zone. Actually, there are probably, I'm sure, pains and learnings, but actually there's some great outcomes from that, isn't it? But you do have to back yourself and just believe in yourself at times to do that, don't you?
You do, but you do have scars. And lots of mistakes. Lots of mistakes.
But then they say you learn more from your mistakes. So hopefully that's the case. And obviously, Alex, in your case, interestingly, I was looking at some statistics and it said, in professional services, actually the workforce is made up of 50% female. So it's a really balanced workforce. However, actually only 30% make it to partner level. So clearly there's been a huge kind of dedication and effort to get to where you are today. So again, it'd be brilliant just to hear any sort of insight from your side on those kind of key moments for you.
Yeah, definitely, Rich. And I'll probably do it in reverse order if I'm honest. So I guess joining EY, I'm not a qualified accountant, but on the way in, I said, because I was on the MD track at Barclays, so I kind of knew that career path. And from an EY perspective, I asked the question, can you become an equity partner if you're not an accountant? Was told that one person had done it globally. So I thought, well, one person's done it. There is that option. And I guess the sort of big difference I saw from an EY perspective was 11 months into role, which was my first year, was asked to join Pathway to Partner. And I was like, brilliant, what does that mean? And obviously there was a tight deadline to meet, as there always are with these things. But then roll the clock forward, I'm now going into my third year as equity partner. Really proud that I'm kind of leading that. No one else has sort of done that from an EY perspective, leading what I would call a mid-market regional business. And to the hat point, I've got several hats now, 2 UK roles and the rest in the region. But it just goes to show that you can do it. And I would say that it was kind of hard work, determination. When I joined EY, it was kind of setting up a business within a business. But it just goes to prove that, you do have the supporters there if you kind of do, sort of deliver hard work, etc. So I guess that was sort of the real pivotal moment. I didn't come into it thinking, right, I want to be an equity partner, because I didn't really understand how partnerships worked, having left the kind of PLC world. I guess two of the parts that was sort of pivotal in my career, and you mentioned this at the start, Rachel, is that network piece. Everybody feels like they know me, which, is a really nice compliment. I guess my sort of advice there has always been, if you have an opportunity, grab it with both hands. Even if you think, how am I going to do this or deliver it or fit it in? And that has always been something. When I joined Barclays, as an example, I took on a lot of extra roles and responsibilities. And the key one that I led was the Professional 100 Club. which was an independent networking group in Leeds. There's probably people on the call that hopefully have heard of it. And that allowed me to kind of know every practice in town. And I knew every partner of those firms because I had to ask them for money to support their juniors and managers coming through the ranks. And I guess now I've been operating in the Yorkshire market for sort of 22 years. You know, that's how I've kind of got to know a lot of people. And I guess that sort of market black book and connection point, which is something that I do spend a lot of time with. And my biggest thing is how can I help and how can I give back? And those two things, I guess, have sort of allowed me to continue that network and equally just kind of building that community, really.
Yeah, and it's something we'll look at later on, but I think the network is really something that is fundamental, I think, to all of us, isn't it? That we don't probably put enough focus on. And I think as naturally as females, and I know I do it, you know, we overthink things, you know, can we do this? But that just proves, Alex, that like say one person had done it before you, the natural brain would be, well, if only one person's do it, then that means probably it's going to be very difficult. But actually to flip that over to go, well, if one person's done it, then I can do it. You know, it's trying to flip those into positive sort of thoughts, isn't it? Which I think is really important. So, and Jenny, and again with you, and I mentioned this at the beginning, you know, it's really interesting with the network that we speak to. I know not many females sort of get to partner level within kind of that PE corporate advisory space because it can be overwhelming. It's long hours, you know, it can be very challenging, and then you tend to find that sort of stats show that sort of that drops off at the senior level. So obviously fantastic that you've got there, and it'd be great to sort of share some insight from your side around you know, any key moments.
Yeah, I think it sort of echoes in some respects. It's saying yes to things, even if it makes you uncomfortable, but also finding out it's either success out of failure or not being scared of failure. But I think that's a comment that I did with INEOS. It was because in audit, whilst my client feedback was brilliant and my upward feedback was brilliant, I didn't have the sponsorship. There was no me in the partner group or someone that looked like me. I couldn't see myself up there. They couldn't see me up there. I was looking for what else to do. So I said yes to the secondment. And it was meant to just be covering maternity leave, but then the sale process happened, etc. And I found myself thrown into stuff that I had never done before, but loving every second of it. A few years later, whilst I was in TS, I said a similar thing. I said yes to an internal secondment. And I went down to London to be executive assistant to the head of TS. This one wasn't such a success, I'll be honest. I think my northernness didn't quite translate. I forgot that I could ask for help. I didn't have my team around me. I didn't have the people that I trusted. The feedback wasn't brilliant. I came back up north after 6 months with my tail between my legs, figuring that, well, anyone that's got my future promotion, sign off, thinks I'm average at best at this point. I've got no chance. And what changed for me actually was, a local sponsorship partner, really experienced partner, just saying, okay, that's fine. That happened. Let's focus on what did go well. Let's focus on your path to associate director, because I was a manager at the time. And I was shocked. I was expecting to be like, what did you do? But instead it was just like, flips happen, Jen. It's not like it was an unmitigated failure like you're thinking. There was lots of good things about it. You're here now. What's your business case? Let's carry on. And that was really pivotal to me, that whole, you can fail and your life and career aren't over. So that made a really, really big difference to me. And I think randomly, and this might be a bit opposite to what some women experience, but having my first child made a big difference to me in a really positive way, because I came back very, very, very focused. Yes, there's very much a assumption people in my role that it's long hours, it's very inflexible, that you're pulled apart. I don't work weekends. I do a 4-day week. I've done a 4-day week since having my first child, who is now 7. In that time, I went from being a director at KPMG onto partner track, but ultimately moved to be a partner at Quartus, helped growing a team from 0 to 50. I don't work weekends. I don't work Mondays. it's doable. If not in every situation, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying everyone needs to go ahead and do it. It worked for me. It gave me a particular focus. And I think my previous experiences of let's just give this a try. Because, you know, if it doesn't work, I'll try something else. Really helped play into that for me. But it did. So
I think definitely a key takeaway from everybody, isn't it? Go out your comfort zone and positive positive mental attitude to kind of take you to that next sort of stage. And you've probably answered some of this, Jenny. So, but I'll go to sort of Kira. And in terms of a major transition, because you've been to lots of different businesses, and you know, coming into the world of kind of PE or some other businesses, what how have you approached those big transitions in your, so when you've taken your first FD role, your first CFO role, you've got into PE, how have you kind of approached those and stepped into those and kind of navigated that change?
I think I've changed my approach over time. When I was more junior in my career and had coaching, I actually saw it as a negative. I remember my the first FD role. They offered me the role, but fed back that we really like you, we want to give you the role, but we feel that you need more experience to have a different influence and style. You know, you have one style and you need to be able to adapt. So we want to offer you the role, but it's subject to coaching. And I look back and I was quite offended. I remember and also I met the rest of the directors, none of them were getting coaching, and thought, well, you know, they're not perfect. So I thought of it quite negatively, like, well, why me? What's wrong with me? Went through the process, but didn't really embrace it. You know, you fast forward 15 years, and actually I look back and think how lucky I've been in all my roles, where I've had organizations that have invested in me, both in one-to-one coaching, executive coaching, and there's people that haven't experienced that in their career, and I think that's how I've handled it. Rachel, you know, I've even paid personally myself in sections of my career for that coaching, because you don't have all the answers. And I think we talked about this. I recently met someone who described the CFO role that I do is like you're a GP, you're like a doctor. You know lots of information and little bits of everything, but you're never going to be an expert. So I think that the coaching's helped me in that self-reflection and just trying to prepare. And as I leave sort of one journey and start another, thinking, okay, what's all the good bits that I think I've done well, but reflecting on where I think I could do better or have responded different, and if those challenges come up in the new role, how will I react? And just that self-reflection and coaching is probably the biggest thing I've done in those life-changing moments in my career. And I'm not very good at it because I do default to the bits that I always kick myself for, and then think, damn, I've still not done it. I was aware, but when stress and kicks in, you just sometimes default to who you are, and it's really hard.
Right, we do have a couple of good questions. I don't know whenever you're ready. So
yeah, go on, Sam, go for it.
So first, there's two. So if you can find someone who's willing to chat on them. So the first is from Stephanie saying, have any of the presenters ever had feelings of imposter syndrome? And then the second one is, I think in the first session we discussed that women are less likely to apply for a role unless they tick all the boxes on the requirements, tick 100% of them, whilst men would likely just apply and take the chance. I think it will have been part of a bigger piece, but both those, so the imposter syndrome question and thoughts from the panel on, like you say, would you specifically wait until you ticked every box for a progression role, or would you take the risk?
Well, on that point, and thanks for the questions, guys, and Steph, I'll go to that first, because actually the next kind of core area we're going to go to is sort of focused with Kira, and that is all around imposter syndrome. So again, as a recruiter, and I speak to thousands of people, you know, across the year, and the most common theme for females is confidence and imposter syndrome. Whatever level you're at, wherever you're at in your career, you know, it is such a common theme, and Kira and I had a conversation about it actually as we were kind of preparing for this. Even the most confident people, and probably everybody sat around this panel, all have it. It's totally normal. And I was listening to something the other day, and it talks about very small steps to take you out of that imposter. So whether it's presenting, whether, whatever it may be, is doing some very small steps to kind of get to a place where you're getting some exposure, but without being totally kind of overwhelmed by it. But it was one question that I had for Kira, and it was, what sort of confidence issues and kind of self-doubt have you faced sort of throughout your career?
Yeah, I think I have it every day for whoever asks that question, every single day. My imposter syndrome for me hasn't been about my technical ability. I've always been really academic, real geeky. I know I will go and learn and get the answer. So that my imposter syndrome is actually the foundations of who I am. So it's really hard. So, I'm from a working class background in Ireland. None of my family really went to university. None of them had senior roles. I talk fast, the Irish accent, I'm not polished, I haven't got a very elegant vocabulary, so I am so comfortable standing on the shop floor, in the factory floor. Give me that and a round of drinks at the pub any day. Put me in that boardroom with these private equity investors, the red brick unis that I didn't even know what they were, people that are from maybe that posh background. The more south I go, the more intimidated I get, and that's not changed in 25 years. I'm definitely more comfortable up north. It's really, really hard because it does impact me in the boardroom, because there is psychology books out there, there's studies, if you talk slower, if you have a deeper voice, if when you speak less and people listen more. But I'm so opinionated. As much as I try and speak less, I want to talk about everything. So therefore when I'm really trying to make a point, I know it can get lost. So my imposter syndrome is there every single time I walk into a boardroom. Even when I've worked with the people for 2 years, I still get knots in my stomach if I've got something I need to try and achieve. And I've over the years, shall I go and try and get lessons to make my accent sound a little posher, or should I do this? Or I don't think it ever goes away. It's horrible. Yeah. So I have it every single day, but people would be surprised because I come across so confident.
And that's for me as an outward person, that's your infectious energy, and that's the confidence that you portray, but clearly, like you say, very different behind the scenes. But did the coaching and the mentoring and that element really help? Because again, you don't know what you don't know, and therefore being able to think about things from other people's perspective or in a different way. I always remember when I at HW, when I sort of first joined the board table, and there was me and sort of 5 men all 10 years older, and I didn't know what to say or what to contribute, and so I ended up not saying as much as I should have done. So and I upskill myself actually by coaching and mentoring and support externally. Have you found that that's helped as well?
It does, and the best one that helped me was one only a few years ago, and it was awful for me. She role played me back, and I was like, bloody hell. So coaches before had said, oh, slow down, you get more respect. But having someone say that, but having someone actually mimic you is very. So she literally mimicked my body language, how I was sitting, arms crossed, that I looked aggressive, but playing me back to me, it made me want to get elocution lessons. But that really helped, because it made me see how other people were perceiving me, and it's the first time a coach did that. So yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that, Kieran. And on that, on a sort of slightly different note, but within kind of evolving and staying current, what sort of what skills and professional development have you had which you feel is really important in kind of today's world of staying current? Obviously, AI is a big one, isn't it? And sort of ESG. But are there any areas where you feel are important that people are, as finance professionals, upskilling themselves to remain relevant?
So this one I find hard to answer, because I think, God, maybe I haven't upskilled myself enough. For me, going back to that point of we're GPs, it's so difficult to be an expert when you have to have so many different hats. So I'm probably going to answer this question slightly different. I haven't necessarily upskilled me, but how I stay current or better is I surround myself with a team who have skills that I don't have. You know, that generation coming up are better in Excel than me, better at AI, better at technology, better at data. So therefore, for me to go and do a course when I'm not living and breathing that, because I'm, you know, wearing my different hats, stakeholder management, a lot of meetings, unless you're doing something every day, you don't become an expert. So I feel that I surround myself with people that can bring what I don't have. That means as a team, I'm upskilled and therefore I can succeed. And AI, come back to your point, I think it's being confident. There are so many people selling it as the future. But you know, I'm sitting in boards where people phone the board and you get a phone call going, I'll meet this company, they can save us 200 grand or they can do this. But if your house isn't in order, there's still basic IT, not in many companies, they haven't got the basics. And AI is only as good as the data and the systems that you have. So actually, sometimes you can't jump before you can walk, and companies are more behind than you think in that day-to-day IT infrastructure. And that's some of the challenges I'm facing, lack of investment in those part of the business. As brilliant and sexy as AI sounds, and I won't bore you with some of the technical things I've learned, but some of our systems are so old, they don't have API. You can't even do what's been sold to you without an API. So if yeah, it's hard and you're never going to be an expert. So it's actually surrounding yourself with the right people that you trust. Because I think there's a lot of mis-selling out there in AI, and you need confidence to say no, slow down and understand it first.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's, and we have lots of that around, like you say. In fact, we were talking to someone the other day, and their head of data or was about 26 years old, because actually he knew how that individual was far more savvy than any of us would be put together probably collectively. So like you say, it's bringing the right people around you, isn't it? So so I'm conscious of time. So there was other questions, Kira, but I'm mindful of time. So I'll pass over to Jav then, just in terms of the next section, which is all about sort of visibility and brand.
Yeah, thanks. So obviously, you know, so far, obviously, we've explored these pivotal moments and some of the challenges that have shaped your sort of progression and development. But you know, this is something that I'm very passionate about, but I know that it's increasingly becoming something that's becoming more important for sort of women in finance across the board. And it's that sort of visibility and personal brand in the digital world. And, you know, whether, you know, LinkedIn obviously is going to be the most popular platform we talk about, but even within the first webinar, there was discussion about how sort of people can leverage the likes of TikTok and Instagram as well as any internal platforms. But ultimately, in this digital world, how we show up online will shape how we're seen, heard, and remembered. But also, you know, for women as well, it's, you know, that opportunity where it can significantly enhance your professional and personal development. But ultimately, you know, using it in the right way, and you know how it's going to vary from person to person. So it's not necessarily about sort of, you know, everyone wanting to become a guest speaker and sort of, you know, be as, you know, the great things that the three of you are doing. You can still do it in different ways. So I guess just, you know, from your side, Alex, what's been your sort of experience, you know, when you look at, you know, and the reason we've come to you is, you know, you've done an amazing job in terms of your visibility online and presence, and how then you've sort of, you know, you've carried that, and you've been a great role model for many out there. But I guess, how have you used LinkedIn and just generally social media in that digital landscape to your advantage over the years?
Yeah, thanks, Jav. And I guess the first thing I will say, it's not easy. And back to the kind of imposter syndrome, like we all have that every single day. And I think you have it sort of being out there on social, because ultimately you are creating your social brand, but everybody can see it. And the amount of people that then you bump into the street, whether it's advisors or I go and see clients, or, you know, it can be anybody. They're like, oh, you know, I've seen this and you're doing that and that's great. And you're like, wow. So even if people aren't necessarily liking the comments or posts that you're putting on, they are absolutely seeing it. So my advice to everybody is you've got to put yourself out there, but you've got to do it in an authentic way. So what do I mean by that? So when you see me, whether it's picture posts or whether it's videos, and my God, I hate videos, but we've been encouraged to do videos. You will basically see me because there's only one version of me, and I've always tried to stay really authentic. I guess how I've sort of built up my confidence around the digital profile, if you like, is really understanding that that kind of personal brand is absolutely key to any business that you're working in. So whether you're in industry or whether you're in professional services or otherwise, it is absolutely key. And I'll come back to that. But I've then worked with kind of my social team internally, and I now do quite a lot of coaching for other EY partners that are kind of going on that journey or starting that journey. And I always come down to kind of 3 basics. So if I am posting on LinkedIn and building my brand, what am I posting about? And that will be in 3 areas. Because the reason for that is that any of your followers, anybody that's kind of receiving that content, kind of needs to know what your voice is, what your brand is. So if you kind of just fire anything out there that could be relevant, you are kind of confusing the audience around that brand build. So as an example with myself, I've got 3 key areas that I kind of post about. So the first one is to do with entrepreneurism. I lead our UK Entrepreneur of the Year programme, but I am super passionate about everything to do with entrepreneurism. It could be Black entrepreneurship, women, founders. So my post will be kind of centred around that. The second area is anything to do with our mid-market, so growing our regional business in the north of England. And then the third aspect for me is Business Beats Cancer Yorkshire. So I do a lot of charity work, but I keep it to Business Beats Cancer Yorkshire. I am the chair of that charity. So if you look at any of my posts, it will be either entrepreneurism, private mid-market, or Business Beats Cancer Yorkshire. And that allows then me to be quite consistent in what I'm doing. I would also then encourage, when you've got those 3 principles, it's then a case of like, well, what do you want to say? What do you want to be famous for? What is it that you're trying to connect with? And you, as you say, you don't have to be front and center of everything. You don't have to be doing panels. You can start off quite sort of, and we're all a massive fan of keeping things simple. You know, start talking about what are those 3 things that you're passionate about. And, you know, it could be some thought leadership content. It could be that, you know, you could be working in tax as an example. So, you know, there's an abundance of stuff happening in tax right now. So what do you want to be posting about tax that builds that personal brand, that you are the sort of key person that's kind of leading that? You've got a thought, you've got a view on things. And it's starting with those basics and then kind of building that brand presence up from there. And equally, the followers will then start to increase. And it's then who you are connecting with and following yourself that builds up that whole kind of brand presence as well.
Yeah.
From a client perspective, now every business that I go and see is on LinkedIn. We all are. And I think, you know, people definitely do their homework. So it gives you that credibility instantly, and hopefully then gives you that sort of confidence around how you sort of build that area and kind of focus within your own self-development. I would say that you know, back to the starting point, it's not easy. So, and we're learning all the time. I follow quite a few people where I like their content, I like how they engage, and I'll pick up different bits and pieces that I'll then sort of tweak within my kind of own things that I would post out. So hopefully there's a few areas there, Jav, that just helps.
No, it does, and it's interesting because, you know, personally, I've been on a journey of being very private to then being sort of very public and visible on LinkedIn, and it's true many things you say around, you know, finding some of those pillars and anchors that you can then sort of not be accountable to, but then you know that that's going to be your voice and what you want to be known for. And it's interesting, I'm sure, you know, for you as well. I was at a networking event the other week, and you're the person who posts about mental. I do a lot on mental health awareness. Oh, you post on mental health on LinkedIn. So, you know, it does work. You know, we're talking about how it can impact your. It's not just about personal brand. It then impacts your professional and personal development as a result. Now, interestingly, you touched on that not everyone may have the confidence to be that sort of voice, etc. And, you know, even if speaking is not your thing, you know, I guess, you know, just a final point around how else can they use the digital world and social media to their advantage if they don't want to sort of speak? You know, what are the other opportunities that they can still, you know, use the digital landscape to their advantage?
Yeah, I think in terms of using it, again, it comes back to what's important to you. And, you know, there's a lot of content on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah.
And I say every day is a school day. We're learning new things every single day. You know, so you can use the platform, you know, we've touched on AI, you know, there's so many kind of webcasts and learning and everything else that's kind of posted on LinkedIn. I guess for me, it's then making sure that you've got your finger on the pulse in terms of kind of equally what content you are seeing on there, who are you following, and that will then help sort of shape your views and perspectives. I would say, I think from a networking perspective as well, it is super helpful. And equally, I think time's probably the most sort of crucial element that we all need, probably an extra 10 or 20 hours a week. And I guess for me, it's always then been, you know, in the week, what is the one thing that I'm going to commit to? And equally using then LinkedIn to be able to either support or advocate for that. You know, so it could be that you've attended something and you've really loved the people that you've kind of met. So, you know, doing a quick post to be like, I've been to this really fantastic discussion. Here's my 3 key takeaways. And that is then just a simple way of putting yourself out there. So you're kind of out there, you've got a voice, but you are then giving reflection, and that will definitely help others out there that are kind of going on a similar journey. So starting somewhere there definitely really helps. And then the engagement that you get, whether it's directly onto that post, whether it's direct messages or emails. And the biggest thing then is just make sure you follow up. So if someone's bothered to kind of connect with you and resonates with what you're saying, you know, follow up on that. I'm always a massive believer that you're never sure where conversations will go. So if someone's bothered to DM me, absolutely following up and then really understanding, well, what is it that they are interested in? How can I help? You know, what does that look like? And that confidence will then help you really kind of, I guess, kickstart that sort of visibility, but also so you feel that you are having an impact, and equally that you kind of seeing that progression really as well.
Definitely. And whether, like I said, you know, like I say, it's such a big learning opportunity sort of out there. Like I said, every day is a learning day on there. You know, networking, influencing, writing, reading, knowledge share, mentoring, you name it. There's a host of opportunities, not just the guest speaking. And I think what we've said, and anyone listening and watching, and we said it about webinar one, we could even dissect this and have one session just dedicated to this. But what we're going to do after this webinar series is take a lot of these topics and then deep dive further and create a lot more insights to share with people afterwards. So I just hope that it's giving people, you know, just even in this small section, just things that they can maybe take away, especially around digital world. And then, I guess moving on to the next section, you know, with Rachel, just around sort of workplace cultures and progression, really, you know, and then we can then sort of pick up on that.
Thanks, Jav. Thanks, Alex. So with Jav and I looked at some data on this, and it was quite interesting because when we look about the sort of, or when we think about the workplace now, Jenny, and we touched upon this when we were speaking before, that, you know, you've got a much more hybrid working arrangements, but actually some organisations have some great initiatives in place to kind of support that. And there was a piece of data which said 80% of women are reported to having to overperform to prove their worth, and 69% worry about losing visibility if they're not in the office full time, with that kind of more hybrid working. So I suppose linked to that, how do you, and I know you mentioned at Quarters to have some, you know, your sort of hiring and support really encourages kind of developments, but how do you support that kind of when working remotely to get a more effective way to support those hybrid teams or people progressing still?
Yeah, no, that's great. In terms of our team, we have a Jill. Jill is one of our associate directors, and she came to us after a 5-year career break raising her kids. She works part-time, she works term time. She works most of her time from home. She comes into the office 1 day a week. This is in transaction services, fast pace, etc. And I know she's not in the office very much, but it's irrelevant. And in my opinion, that's how it should be. She's visible because she wants to be. So, you know, she seems to do it quite effortlessly. I'm sure it's not effortless. But you know, when she's not at work during the summer holidays, I hate to say on holiday because she's running around after her kids. But during that term break, you know, she's still posting onto our group chat. When she's back, she's brought in a fresh perspective. She's knowledge sharing. She's on Teams all the time. You know, she comes in when she can come in. But it's all about communication. You know, when she's working with new people, she pins on her working hours and where she's going to be to them. It's all about communication. And as long as you're communicating, you can kind of be anywhere, is my opinion. That won't work in all sectors, right? But in finance, where do you need to be? Largely, you need to be behind a laptop. And so where that laptop is kind of irrelevant. And with Teams now, so much interaction, you can embrace that technology. Don't get me wrong, I love going out and meeting new people face to face, and I've really enjoyed that sort of switch post COVID to being able to do that again. But we still do the majority of our work on Teams because the clients, surprisingly enough, don't actually want us on their site asking them a load of questions all the time, and it works for people. And I think that the point is to just embrace optionality, embrace technology, and accept that not everybody does things in exactly the same way.
Yeah.
Jill brings something that nobody else brings to our team, and I don't think we could imagine life without it.
And do you think then, Jenny, that's really helped kind of allowing people to progress their career and still move up to senior levels and director levels and partner levels because they've got much more flexibility around how they can work?
I think that's an absolute factor, but ultimately you need sponsorship of that arrangement, and of any arrangement. I think when I look at my career, what's worked really well is that sponsorship. And it can be when you're part-time or you're working from home, that it's your own feelings of uncertainty and inadequacy that will stop you progressing, as opposed to actually somebody thinking, oh, well, I'm not going to progress her because I only see her 1 day a week. You know, sometimes we can be our own worst enemies. So I think what you need is the sponsorship to say, you know, forget the hybrid working element of it. Do you have the skills to do what we need you to do? Are you going to be able to drive things forward with your own skill sets? And sometimes we need somebody else to tell us that. So I think sponsorship is a really key factor.
Yeah, and it sort of links into a topic that we didn't really have time to discuss above, actually, that I was going to bring up with Kira, but I think we're always mindful of time, is that sponsorship, that allyship, that mentorship is really important, isn't it? And I think if you have that individual that can back you and support you in those boardroom conversations or at that more senior level, that's certainly helpful. And have Quarters have they put many initiatives into place around their hiring practices and how that might have changed over the last couple of years?
Yeah, so I think, you know, what we came up during COVID, so I think some changes to practices were kind of almost enforced upon us, right? Because, you know, it was a very different time. But what we had there was then a lot of different type of people coming to market, people that we wouldn't necessarily have looked at before, those returning from work, those part qualified market came alive during that period, because people were sort of potentially struggling, etc. We had people coming from doing ACA or ACCA in industry, looking to come into practice. You know, people were looking for a change, and so we had to be just really open to different backgrounds and different routes through. And we are so much the stronger for it. When I look at those people that came back through at that point. You know, some of them had failed an exam, and at that point people were trying to get rid of people, right? So one fail and you were out, whereas, you know, previously you might have had one or two further options. People that were sort of struggling with lack of support, particularly now that they're working from home during COVID, etc. I think just because people aren't thriving in one situation doesn't mean to say they're not going to thrive. And what we've found is having those people come through and believing in them and giving them the space to grow and develop. They're some of our strongest people now.
So I think fundamentally, like you say, opening up those options creates a much, and naturally, as we all know, a more diverse workforce, which in turn is commercially great for any business, isn't it? You've got lots of different minds and different backgrounds sat around the table. So
absolutely. I mean, I always say you want to have like diversity of thought, but shared values. So we also put values right at the heart of our recruitment process, our appraisal process, and our promotion process. So we give that really strong weighting. Are you living and breathing the values of business, as well as, you know, can you tick off the competencies? And when we have people transitioning, whether it be male or female, coming back from paternity or maternity, you know, the shared leave, we give them that coaching that, you know, Kira talked about earlier in terms of how important it is. Give them that time for self-reflection, because I can tell you, one day pushing kids on a swing and the next day running like 6 deals and being in the boardroom, it's quite jarring. And so having a bit of support to transition your head into the appropriate space makes a massive difference.
Great, thanks, Jenny. Thank you for sharing that. Was there anything else, Jav, on your side, or I'm just conscious we've got sort of 7 minutes? So
I think there's things to ask at the end from all three of you, really, in terms of, you know, what could be 2 or 3 takeaways that you could impart on people that are watching and listening, that you'd say, you know, around it. I guess before I get there, and, you know, obviously I've followed Quarters very slowly, you know, over the last sort of few years, and I think breaking the mold in many ways, you know, in terms of how an advisory firm should be set up in terms of culture and environment. I guess the reality is, and obviously we see it more, that not everyone's for turning, or not yet anyway. So I think you'll be ahead of the curve, but there's so many, and you'll have heard directly and indirectly where they're not sort of, there's a journey to do to get there. So I guess, how can we get, you know, more sort of employees on that journey? Is that more of a time thing? But I guess for ones who are trying to sort of navigate in sort of environments where it's not as flexible, you know, I guess, you know, what do the panel think around, you know, how to do in more constraints than what, you know, than the more freedom that seems to be at Quarters, because it is a rarity.
I'm sort of happy to jump in, Jav, and maybe kind of reflects to a couple of questions in there as well. I'm a massive believer, if you don't ask, you don't get. And I know there is vulnerability with that, but I would say those that feel like they're kind of at a point in their career where they don't feel like they're progressing, or they haven't got the support, I think there are definitely people within the business that you're in that will help and support you. And it's finding those stakeholders or finding those champions that can help you navigate what that looks like. So, you know, even within EY, I'll help a lot of people coming through the kind of non-equity and equity kind of partner routes. And you know, so my first question is always like, well, who's your stakeholder group? Who's your champions? Who's your supporters? And then it's making sure then that what you want and that career path and that story, you've got sort of a view of that. And then what I mean by that is then every sort of interaction that you're having, whether it's informal, formal, whether you're getting in a lift with someone or kind of, you know, brewing a coffee at the side of somebody, that almost kind of talk track of what you want and where you want to be becomes part of those touch points. And the more that you kind of vocalize that and have more people aware of sort of where you are now and where you'd like to be, I think are kind of key parts that have definitely you know, helped the people that I've kind of been supporting through the organisation, and just making sure that that kind of navigation of that career path and what comes next is sort of easier to navigate when, you know, there's a few people that are around you and supporting you with that kind of mission, really.
And I know, Kira, you mentioned just as part of the sort of prep thing that because of the landscape and culture being so varied, that sometimes even as you're moving up and especially start going into more sort of exec and senior finance, is the for some, and obviously might be some trade-offs that you might need to make or some tough decisions. Kira, I don't know if you wanted to sort of just sort of share that as well.
It is interesting. I think Jenny's really lucky to work in such a flexible environment. And I don't know if there is a difference in financial services versus industry, because I don't believe finance is behind a laptop. I would be absolutely awful at my job if I was behind a laptop. I hear it by people making cups of coffee. I hear it by walking the floor. I hear it going around our sites. And I do think there is a lot more flexibility in that financial services sector because it is a different service and your product's different. So I think for those in industry, I think the flexibility isn't always there. But I don't necessarily disagree with that, because at the end of the day, the businesses are here to survive and make a profit and stay as a successful business, employing whether that's 100 or 1,000 people. And we have to balance the success of a business with flexibility. And so it can be tough. And I've worked in very tough environments that, I have made a choice where I struggled. Children for me was something I chose not to have to succeed, and people might think that's sad I had to make that choice, but it was my choice. I could have went down a different career path and went into different industries, but it's really hard to job share and flexible working in a CFO, definitely in private equity and your clients, Jenny, because the investors are very demanding, and unfortunately, yeah, flexibility is, I always joke, if I had kids to be in social services, they would have been taken off me. So yeah, I do think there is a reality out there, Javad, that people sometimes are afraid to talk about, but it doesn't mean it's wrong. You choose that path, and I chose that path.
I mean, Ishay, what moving into webinar 3 is we're going to be talking about the last mile. So, we've talked about the journey that everyone and to get to where you want to be and where you are. But that sort of last mile, and then, once, many of you there, the challenges that will be faced. And interesting, this topic will come up. One of the panel speakers is they did a job share as the finance director level. And, again, but we are the conversation, look, it is possible, but there is such a long way to go. And I think this whole thing of culturally and where we're at as a society in the world of work, there's a lot of positives over the last few years, but there's still just a lot of work that needs doing and within organizations to get us to where we need to be. But I guess what is encouraging, and whether it's this series or these conversations, the more we keep having them, the more we can just keep the conversation moving forward. And eventually these sort of small incremental sort of changes can have that bigger impact and a cumulative impact over time. So yeah, I think that's where, it's been sort of really good to have, to have this particular session today. And obviously, it will lead into that sort of final mile and sort of webinar 3 well. So no, that's it. I've really enjoyed it. And, it's been great. Sort of Rach, obviously, sort of just for you to
I was just saying my sort of 3 takeaways, and thank you all of you for joining today. We really appreciate your time, because we know you're all very busy, and there's been some brilliant insight, and I've educated myself on lots of things, and particularly the social media piece, Alex, that's totally out of my comfort zone. Jav will regularly say, have you posted this week, Rach? Not yet, I'm planning on. So thank you for sharing all that. But my sort of key takeaways, and I think for everybody here, is say yes to opportunities, because actually, why not? Back yourself. And be positive, because actually you find that when you get in there, you surround yourself with kind of good people who do support you, and you deal with the challenges as they come, and if you don't ever do it, then you'll always wonder what if and why not. So I think they're definitely my sort of takeaways.
And also then
and I'm sorry we haven't got round to all the questions, so we will get back to those post, because I know there's a few that have come in, Sam and Lucy, isn't there?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So, yeah, we'll start the questions and get a few points of feedback and get back to the individuals.
Yeah, no, we did it after webinar 1, so we'll do that. I think yeah, my final thing is I think allyship, that you can get along the journey, and mentorship and coaching. It was a theme in the first one and here as well, and I'm sure it will carry on in the next webinar. So they definitely be ones that I'll, that I'm hoping others will take away as well. So no, Alex, Kira, Jenny, huge thanks
Thank you very
for
much.
taking the time and contributing to this. We will be dissecting a lot of this in detail and in future sort of post and write-ups, etc. So I think everything you've said will be play a big part. And yeah, thank you for being part of this webinar series. And taking part this afternoon.